airport in Kabul because the roads leading to the airport are controlled by the Taliban. This is a problem, and it could get worse. You'd think official Washington would be very concerned by this, but no. They are far more worried about how to move thousands of Afghan refugees to this country as quickly as possible. That's a bipartisan concern, by the way, Republicans as well as Democrats, just in case you were wondering about their priorities. We'll have the latest on that in just a moment. But first, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. It was just the other day, it feels like, in fact, it was 2 weeks ago exactly, that the Biden administration announced the suspension of private property rights in America. Building owners are prohibited from forcing their tenants to pay rent. So other people now have the right to live in your house for free. America's housing stock has been nationalized. From here on out, it's controlled by the Biden administration. But wait a second, you ask. This is America. Can that be legal? No, it's not legal. In fact, it's unconstitutional, and we know that because the Supreme Court said so clearly. But as Maxine Waters put it, who cares? What are those old judges going to do about it? What army do they control? They're not doing anything. So the Biden administration just ignored the highest court and did it. Thanks to COVID, the media have decided they can do whatever they want. And so they are. Where does that leave the rest of us, you might ask, the people who aren't in the Biden administration? Well, in a word, that leaves us exposed. Without property rights protected by a functioning legal system, American citizens have nothing at all. Everything that you thought you owned, very much including your own body, now belongs to the Democratic Party. Where you travel, who you speak to, where you live, what you say and write and think, all of this is now controlled by the party. And everything means everything, even your medical autonomy. This is funny because for decades they have told us, they have shrieked at us, that medical decisions can only be made between you and your personal physician. That is a sacred pact. Politicians have no right to tell doctors what to do. Hey, politicians, get your hands off my body. That'd be the Handmaid's Tale, remember? Turns out they didn't mean it. And just to show you how much they didn't mean it, we take you now to New York City, whose mayor is not only famously incompetent, but also physically unclean. Of the 340 million Americans now living in this country, Bill de Blasio is the single last person you would ever go to for medical advice. His diet consists almost exclusively of bong hits and Pringles. There is no chance he brushes his teeth every day. Your 17-year-old stoner nephew has much better personal hygiene than he does. And yet, somehow, because Bill de Blasio still has political power due to the fact that a tiny group of people once voted for him 4 years ago, he has decided to overrule practicing physicians and force his subjects to take medicine they may or may not need, and in some cases that might hurt them whether or not they want to take it. That's the rule. In New York City, you are no longer allowed indoors, even on private property, unless you've taken the COVID shot and carry the documents to prove that you have. That's now the law. And it's a law, by the way, that not a single person voted for. Voting being part of that outmoded racist system we used to call democracy. No more. According to New York's new order, indoor spaces are off limits to the unvaccinated. How are we defining indoor spaces? Quote, indoor spaces are those that have a roof or overhang and 3 or more walls. In order to enter venues covered by the rule, you will have to show ID along with proof of vaccination. End quote. That's the law. At a press conference yesterday, Bill de Blasio displayed this graphic showing all the places you are no longer allowed to go without identification and proof of vaccination. Your papers, please. That would include restaurants, bars, cafeterias, grocery stores, bakeries, fast food places, and aquariums. Hope you're not hungry or looking to see fish because you can't go. Businesses in New York, meanwhile, are forced to hang posters explaining this mandate, and they have to do it near their entrances. They don't own their own walls anymore either. Watch Bill de Blasio explain all of this.
It's easy. All you have to do is show proof of vaccination. That could be a CDC paper card, that could be an Excelsior Pass, an NYC COVID Safe app, whatever works. All you got to do is show that proof and have ID as well.
Oh, it's totally easy. Just show your medical papers. And this applies only to COVID, by the way. No one's checking your hepatitis or HIV status. That would be terrible. But COVID, yes, it's absolutely required or you're not allowed to eat. And all you need is proof of vaccination and an ID, a government ID. But wait a second, you may be asking, if you've lived in this country longer than, let's say, 10 days, weren't we told that it's racist to require ID? Certainly it is for voting, but now it's not racist to require ID for people to go inside buildings in our largest city. So what does this mean for the 72% of young African Americans who are not vaccinated? They're not going to be able to go anywhere. So this policy, by the principles of equity, has disparate impact. That's the phrase they used to describe racism in action. It affects some groups more profoundly than others. And the group most affected by this is young African Americans. So how can it stand? Where's the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department? Aren't they jumping on this? This is worse than a standardized test. Bill de Blasio didn't explain any of that. People with power no longer need to explain anymore. If you don't comply, you're going to jail. Not for looting, that's totally fine in New York, it's reparations. But failing to follow a law that no one has voted for and show your papers in a restaurant, that's something that Bill de Blasio will not accept.
And we're going to remind people that we really want people to take this seriously. Don't fool around with fake vaccination cards. By the way, it's against the law, and there are serious penalties for that.
Oh, there's serious penalties. What are you going to do to us? The same thing you did to the people who looted Macy's? Buzz off, Dumbo. So what exactly does this law say? Well, we checked the fine print because we believe in the law. And this rule does not allow for exemptions, period. Not for religious reasons, because religion is stupid, worshiping Bill de Blasio as our new state religion, and certainly not for medical reasons, because Bill de Blasio is now your doctor, and he'll decide what's medically necessary. So we called City Hall in New York and asked, maybe we're missing something here. They told us they couldn't answer the question, but anyone who had concerns could contact the city's small business hotline for more information. So like morons, we actually did that. We followed instructions, and we talked to an operator at the hotline. And the operator told us, not surprisingly, they've been inundated with hundreds of calls from people asking the very same question. What was the answer? They didn't have an answer. Sorry, it was a mystery. Finally, this afternoon, purely because we're a news organization and they suspected maybe we'd report some of this, City Hall did get back to us and sent us some guidance. Here's the guidance. They said that businesses cannot allow unvaccinated customers indoors, period, for anything, quote, beyond a quick and limited purpose. So there are no exceptions to this rule, and that would include people who've already had COVID and have high levels of protective antibodies in their system. It doesn't matter. They have to get the shot anyway. Bill de Blasio demands it. Well, is that safe? Is it safe to do that? I've had COVID. I've recovered. I've got high levels of antibodies. Not going to get COVID. Unlike a lot of people who've just been vaccinated, probably not going to get it. But you're going to get the vaccine anyway. Is that a good idea? Not a ton of research on this. That's frowned on now. But researchers at Mount Sinai Hospital have looked into it. And here's what they found. It may not be safe. It turns out that serious whole body reactions, chills, fever, joint problems, are far more common in people who've recovered from COVID and got the vaccine anyway. Is that surprising? It shouldn't be. This is exactly why we don't vaccinate people against diseases they've already recovered from. Except now. Now they must get the vaccine, even though it doesn't seem to offer a lot of protection from COVID infection, weirdly. Ask Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He's vaccinated. He's also sick with COVID right now. How'd that happen? What's going on here exactly? What is this about? We'd love to know. Unfortunately, we're long past the time when the people in power feel they have to answer even simple questions. The emphasis is on us and our total obedience. Here's the disgraced governor of New York, maybe the second to last person you'd call for medical advice, telling more than 600,000 doctors and nurses in the state that regardless of what they think about medicine, he's decided they must get the shot.
I think we need dramatic action to get control of this situation. So in New York and our state hospitals, all patient-facing healthcare workers must get vaccinated. There will be no testing option for patient-facing healthcare workers. That is a point of contact that could be a serious spreading event. And we want to make sure that those healthcare workers are vaccinated, period.
I mean, nobody has a sense of humor anymore. Getting a COVID lecture from Andrew Cuomo, the person single-handedly responsible for the highest death rate from COVID in America. Let's go ahead and put Idi Amin at the head of the Human Rights Commission next time, shall we? And then not allow anyone to laugh about it? So here you have Andrew Cuomo, who may or may not be a made member of the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, telling you that he suddenly knows more about COVID than practicing nurses and physicians. He's telling them what to do. He's giving them a medical mandate. What's interesting is that he feels he has to. What's interesting is how many of New York's healthcare workers remain unvaccinated. They don't have the information necessary to make that decision. They don't know enough about COVID. They treat COVID. And yet, as of today, more than 75% of New York's 450,000 hospital workers, as well as 74% of the adult care facility workers and 67% of the 150,000 nursing home workers have not taken the COVID vaccine. What? Why is that? Maybe before we mandate anything, we should answer that question. Why would people in the medical profession be willing to risk losing their jobs over the shot? That's a sincere question. What is the answer? Hey, Business Insider. Hey, Atlantic Magazine. Hey, New York Times. Why don't you do a story on that? And just answer the simple question. And then answer this. Why are bureaucrats with no medical expertise whatsoever, Bill de Blasio, the pothead who doesn't wash his socks? Andrew Cuomo telling nurses and physicians what drugs they must take? This is totally nuts. In June, these nurses in Houston explained their reasoning for not getting the shot.
Houston Methodist Hospital requiring all staff members to get vaccinated for COVID-19 or be fired.
Right off the bat, I pretty much decided I was not going to do it. Everybody in America should have the right to decide what they put into their body.
Jennifer Bridges has worked at Houston Methodist in Baytown more than 6 years.
Planned on staying with Methodist for the rest of my life.
She spent the last year and a half treating coronavirus patients and even got sick herself.
I just had an antibody test like a week ago. I still have antibodies in my system, but it doesn't count for them. It doesn't work.
More than 100 co-workers have joined Jennifer with this lawsuit against the hospital. It claims Methodist is forcing its employees to be human guinea pigs.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to argue with their reasoning. And if you want to argue with it, what's the argument against it? Speak slowly so we can understand. But no one wants to argue anything anymore. It's purely about obedience. It's hardly about medicine. More than 150 healthcare workers in that Houston hospital system were fired. So remember that the next time they tell you there's a healthcare shortage in this country. This is lunacy. We should not go along with it. It has nothing to do with medicine. It is a terrifying precedent that if we let solidify, we will deeply, deeply regret. This is not about COVID. This is about the existence of rational decision-making in this country and personal autonomy. Most people are going along with this because they're afraid. A few brave souls are not. She joins us now. Becky Paul, thanks so much. I appreciate your coming on. I know you probably don't do a lot of TV shows, so we're grateful that you're here tonight. Tell us why you did what you did. Why did you resign from your job?
Well, first of all, Tucker, I'd like to thank you for having us on and for giving healthcare workers a voice. You know, we have so many of us, doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, physical therapists, PAs, nurse practitioners. We're all educated healthcare professionals, and we're willing to walk away from a job, our careers, essentially. We've worked our entire lives for these careers. And when you have that kind of conviction, you've got to ask yourself, what do they know that we don't know? So,
well, what do you know that the rest of us don't know? I mean, so this is what's so striking about it is you're a practicing nurse. You treat COVID patients. Doctors, respiratory therapists do too. No one can claim that you're uninformed or you don't believe in science. You work in science, unlike the people commenting on this. And you've decided not to take the vaccine. What should we conclude from that, Becky Paul?
Absolutely. Well, Tucker, we've been trained our entire lives to always practice with a questioning attitude. That's what we were trained as nurses. So we question doctors' orders. We question, is it the right medicine for the patient? Is it the right patient? We're the advocate for the patient. So our entire lives, this is how we've practiced our profession. And now we have this mandate that's come through, and the first thing we're going to do is question, okay, does this make sense? And none of it makes sense. None of it has made sense to any of us. First of all, where did the flu go? That was my first question when this all hit, a year and a half ago. And then, we were heroes last year. And now we're made out to be the villains if we decide that we're not going to take this vaccine. And it's just unfortunate because right now we have single moms who depend on this job for their livelihood, for their benefits. We have, I have teammates who have health issues, who they can't afford to take this vaccine. We don't know enough about this vaccine. It is experimental. It's not FDA approved. And we're going to put something in our bodies that we know nothing about. And I'm not going to run the risk of somebody tomorrow coming up and saying, oh, by the way, we made a mistake. We were wrong. Because nobody can 100% tell us right now that this is a safe vaccine. So if we're willing to walk away from our careers for that, that's a huge statement. And a lot of us, some of us can, some of us can't. So I'm here as their voice. And if I can be a voice for all of us, it just breaks my heart, some of the stories that I've heard. Nursing students who have, 2 classes left. I can't even imagine being in my nursing profession, at the end of my nursing career, of classes, and being told I can't finish my clinicals if I don't get the vaccine. Essentially, all of my hard work is for nothing. That's terrible.
Yeah. So if you're a propagandist at another news outlet and you find yourself attacking doctors and nurses because you think you know more about medicine than they do, then we've come to a really, really dark place. You should not be attacked, Becky Paul. I think you've made an entirely fair decision. It's your decision, and I'm grateful that you're willing to talk about it tonight in public. Thank you very much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. We misspoke just a minute ago. Only 75% of healthcare workers in New York have been vaccinated. Again, healthcare workers, meaning a full quarter, have not been. And the question remains, why is that? And we hope that many more of them, not just Becky Paul, will come on this show and in other outlets and explain themselves calmly, non-politically, because it's a real question and we should have the answer before the rest of us are forced to do something that we don't want to do. Well, there are already calls tonight to move thousands of Afghan refugees into the United States. This is happening at exactly the moment that thousands of American citizens are still trapped in Kabul, an issue that seems a much smaller concern to the geniuses who got us there in the first place. In fact, to all of Washington, on about thousands of U.S. citizens, Americans, trapped in Afghanistan. They can't get to the airport in Kabul because the roads to the airport are controlled by the Taliban. Now, the U.S. government allowed that to happen. Joe Biden's on vacation, so he can't explain how he allowed that to happen. But today, the White House press secretary said right out loud that the Biden administration will not guarantee the evacuation of Americans stranded in Afghanistan. Sorry.
Can you offer any guarantee to the Americans and Afghan allies that if they remain there past the end of the month, U.S. troops will help them evacuate past the end of the month?
Leisha, our focus right now is on doing the work at hand and on the task at hand. And that is day by day, getting as many American citizens, as many SIV applicants, as many members of a vulnerable population who are eligible to be evacuated to the airport and out on planes.
Notice how she puts all three together. Americans, special visa applicants, vulnerable population. What the hell is that? You know who's vulnerable is Americans who are trapped in Afghanistan right now. They're American citizens. The American government exists to help American citizens, not to help vulnerable populations, whatever that is. That's a definition that changes depending on which interest group is in power. No, it's Americans. That's the point. It's the American government. But nobody cares. Our leaders are telling us that what really matters is importing tens of thousands of Afghan refugees into the United States before we've even evacuated all of the Americans who are stuck there. Now, keep in mind, these aren't just translators that they want to import, people who've loyally served the U.S. military or whatever. It's anybody in Afghanistan who wants to come here for the free health care. Who's in favor of this? Well, on the record, 46 U.S. senators, 43 Democrats, and 3 Republicans just called on the Biden administration to, quote, create a humanitarian parole category for, quote, Afghan women leaders, activists, judges, and other public figures to quickly and efficiently relocate to the United States. Brian Kemp, the kind of pathetic governor of Georgia, he's a Republican apparently, just announced he wants Afghan refugee camps in his state. Okay. So, of course, the media is completely in favor of this. They hate the population of the United States. CNN is accusing anyone who doesn't want this of being a racist. Though, by the way, Have you seen the people who live in Afghanistan? A lot of them are whiter than I am. It's nothing to do with race. It has to do with putting American citizens first, period. But they don't get that. It's not even a category that makes sense to them. Politico this morning read a symposium on how we can help Afghanistan as if we owe Afghanistan a lot. We've helped Afghanistan a lot, not simply by spending more than $1 trillion there, where'd that money go, but also by letting an awful lot of Afghans move here. More than 100,000 special visas to residents of Afghanistan and Iraq in the past couple of decades. We've issued a total of 300,000 green cards to residents of those two countries. Now we're told that's not enough. We're just hard-hearted or something. We don't take enough immigrants. This country is getting so volatile and divided. Maybe we have a moratorium on any new people coming in until we can sort out our own problems, till we can learn to get along with each other. And after we have brought all of our Americans home. Sean Parnell is running for Senate in the state of Pennsylvania. He was an infantry platoon leader during the war in Afghanistan. He worked with an Afghan interpreter for more than a year before that interpreter helped terrorists plant an IED that killed one of his men. It's a complex subject. He knows it very well, and we're happy to have him on with us tonight. Sean, thanks so much for coming on. Look, this idea that vulnerable populations, whatever the hell that means, should get pride of place are more important than American citizens trapped in Afghanistan. I don't think I've ever seen anything that reveals their priorities more clearly.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Tucker. And if you want to help save this country, go to parnellforsenate.com. So look, we should not have a single conversation about what happens with refugees in Afghanistan until we evacuate American citizens first. That should be our number one priority. The situation is urgent, and we have to get our people out of there before the Taliban takes us hostage. Look, Tucker, I was in Afghanistan for 485 days, 85% casualty rate in my platoon. Some of my men were wounded twice. We worked with an Afghan interpreter for over a year. He was on every mission with us. He was on every fight with us. And one day we got tasked with an observation post to watch info routes from Pakistan into Afghanistan. My platoon that day rolled up onto the hill. We wondered why the Afghan villagers all around that hilltop were watching the platoon. Rolled up onto the hill. One of my trucks hit a plastic Italian TC-6 anti-tank mine. It wounded 4 of my soldiers seriously and killed somebody in my platoon. After that mission was over, during our after-action report, we found out that our interpreter, who had been with us every step of the way, someone who we thought was our friend, we learned that he was working with an Iranian IED cell in Pakistan and coordinated the placement of that mine, which killed one of my troops in a devastating attack. Tucker, just because an Afghan works with us and is friends with us does not actually mean they're safe to bring here. And this is precisely why we cannot bring 30,000 unvetted Afghan refugees to the United States of America. It's an irresponsible policy, and quite frankly, I can't believe we even have to have this conversation. American citizens have to have the priority. They have to be the priority.
Yeah, they're not, though. And something happens in the brains, particularly these middle-aged Republican leaders. Their brains go soft. Low testosterone may be part of the cause, and they decide that every dumb idea they have to kind of cringe and, oh, that's okay. You know what I mean? The governor of Arkansas is like this. The governor of Georgia, like, what is wrong with these people? Why don't you stand up for American citizens? It's not hard.
What I can't wrap my mind around, Tucker, is that we have talking heads, media personalities, and politicians trotting out 20-year-old foreign policy arguments. The idea that we have to fight them there to keep from fighting us here. What happens in Afghanistan doesn't stay in Afghanistan. Tucker, these are not foreign policy arguments. These are arguments for wars in countries at any time, in any place, for an indeterminate amount of time. Think about it. What happens in Africa? It doesn't stay in Africa. What happens in Iraq doesn't stay in Iraq. So I'm tired of these arguments. Our politicians, our leaders have to be more careful with America's sons and daughters. They're the best of us, and we need to take care of them.
Amen. There's an ocean separating us from the rest of the world. Let's use it. Sean Parnell, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So one thing we learned over the weekend as Kabul fell to the Taliban is that permanent Washington has been lying to us for a very long time about what's going on in Afghanistan. Glenn Greenwald was not surprised by that. He's been documenting those lies like the entire country was watching television slack-jawed as the impossible happened. The Taliban swept into Kabul, Afghanistan. No matter how you feel about the occupation, we were very against it. You had to ask yourself, how did this happen, and why wasn't America prepared for it happening? Most people reach the obvious conclusion. They've been lying to us about the state of affairs in Afghanistan, really lying to us for a long time. And by they, we mean not just political figures, but people at the State Department, the Secretary of State, multiple Secretaries of State, and an awful lot of generals at the Pentagon. They haven't been telling us the truth. Now, most people, including everyone on this show, are pretty shocked by that. But not everyone was shocked. Glenn Greenwald has been chronicling this for a long time. He's an independent journalist who writes on Substack. You can read his stuff there, and you should. He joins us tonight. Glenn, thanks so much for coming on. On this and many other subjects, I will say, you've been right. You've been proved right. So you were not surprised to learn that their assessments of what was happening on the ground in Afghanistan were totally false.
Absolutely. You know, I grew up, one of the big events in my childhood that shaped me a lot were the Pentagon Papers, when Daniel Ellsberg inside the government leaked to newspapers the fact that the statements being made by the military about the war in Vietnam, we're winning, we have the Viet Cong on the run, were the exact opposite of what they were saying internally, which is there's no way we could possibly win this war. The best we can do is a stalemate. The same thing happened in Afghanistan, but even worse. The argument that was being made all the way back to George Bush was the goal that we have, and we're making great progress, is building an Afghan national security force that will protect the government and democracy and be able to ward off the Taliban. And that way we can leave when they stand on their own feet, which they're very close to doing. Internally, for 20 years, they were saying the Afghan national forces are a joke, they're corrupt, they're illiterate, they have no capacity to fight whatsoever. And 5 weeks ago, Joe Biden stood before the country and said the Afghan national forces are way more powerful than the Taliban. It's extremely unlikely that the Taliban will overrun the country when we leave, when all intelligence and all internal documents showed exactly the opposite. It's not a case where they got it wrong in good faith. It's a case where they deliberately lied to the public to justify this endless war because so many people were profiting from it.
So that, I mean, I think the question I was about to ask, which is, why would you lie about something that everybody is going to learn about in the end? Like, they had to know they were going to get caught lying because in the end the Taliban did sweep into Kabul. Why? So you think they lied because people were profiting from this exercise, this debacle?
Yeah, the last time I was on your show, or one of the last times, we talked about why Americans should be spending their resources to fix the government of Cuba. The whole point of America First, as articulated by Donald Trump, was we should focus on American citizens. Why should American citizens risk their lives to determine how Kandahar is governed when instead Americans aren't being governed very well at all, and life expectancy and every other indicia of happiness is declining? And the reason is because there's a tiny segment of people, certain people in the corporate media whose ratings go up, and also the defense contractors who fund both parties, who make a lot of power and a lot of profit, as do the security state services, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA, when there's war. And that's what happens is, you know, propaganda is really powerful, right? We see these images of these people desperately trying to get out of Afghanistan, and there's a tendency to say, oh, I want the U.S. to go back and save them. But, you know, we don't see all the people we've killed in Afghanistan who are innocent civilians. That just happens in war. And they control the information that we see to keep us always wanting the next war and to forget.